Hey, it's Nick. It's 9:20 a.m. on March 24th. And I wanted to start these regular meditations kind of inspired by my conversation with Joe Reese last Friday when I was in Park City. And I've always admired Joe. And I got to know him when actually shutting down my startup, Workstream IO, last spring when he had me on his show. And he posted his Friday freestyle last week, kind of in reflection of our conversation about my journey to creating Not Another CEO with my new co-founder David, and just like the journey of shutting something down and figure out what was new. And I and then listening to what Joe said, I just had a couple of additional thoughts, and here goes. Right, I mean, I think a lot of what was really interesting about what he spoke about on Friday was kind of this idea that there are a lot of folks dealing with new job situations in tech in general, these blanket feelings of burnout and malaise, and this feeling for many folks that they're kind of like sick of where they currently are professionally. And my individual journey was very different, and so I'll try to avoid any type of blanket advice, right? But I think in my situation, we had a startup and it just did not work, and I was not fired in the traditional sense, but I was effectively fired by my investors, right? I mean, we decided that like we were not going to continue with this company. And so like, where did I go from there? How did I go from like point A to point B? And it, quite frankly, it took a long time. And I think, Joe talked about this on Friday. I spent a lot of time just thinking about and meditating on what was my new definition of success, right? Like, how was I going to define success in the future? How was I going to define success of my life and of work? And had that changed for me? And I've written a lot about this over the last 12 months. And so again, I'm going to try to avoid providing blanket advice. But if you find yourself in transition, what I found very helpful for myself was to take some time, first off, in just being present in the moment of those feelings of burnout, those feelings of malaise, like the feelings of just like the shittiness of the current moment. Joining, Joe's show to talk about the shutdown of Workstream was actually one of those things that I did that I actually found very, very important, to just acknowledge where I was and to just be able to express that. And I think what that became was this phase that actually felt very uncomfortable for me, which was just like being present in my life, my kid's life, and being present in just a feeling of like, I don't know what's next, and that's okay. And using that as a moment to meditate on and think about how I was going to define success in the future. And I had always been somebody that had defined success as being a top 1% operator, top 1% entrepreneur, constantly comparing myself to the most successful people that I know. And I still do that. I would say, struggle with that. But the journey of creating Workstream IO and shutting it down really changed how I thought about it. And so everyone's situation is different, but I would say if you find yourself trying to figure out your next step, take some time, whatever time you can afford yourself, to be present in that moment and to really address those underlying questions of like, how do I define a success? And what do I care about? Like, who am I and who do I want to be? Right? Like, what do I want to put out there in the world? And for me, those are really important questions to ask myself, and questions like, how can I live authentically and genuinely? And what are all of the pieces of my life professionally and personally that are really, really the most important to me? And so I think we often start with, well, what is the next job that I have, or the next venture that I want to start that is going to help me achieve my goals? But I actually think that's probably the wrong way to start. I think we need to start with ourselves, right? Um, what feels right to us, and maybe just start to do that without any big plans, without any sense of agenda, without any 5-year plan, without any 10-year plan. And for me, that was very, very non-natural. And I kind of had to force myself to do it. And for me, that was writing. So I started writing my Substack, which has become Not Another CEO Substack. But and now there are plans for that, but that really started with no agenda beyond, I feel like I need to write about my failure. I feel like I have lessons from my failure that I want to pour out and to express to others, to help pay forward that failure. And so for me, that was very, very new, to just start doing without a plan. And so maybe just consider that. Can you just do something that feels right for you without a broader agenda, and in whatever way that you can within the kind of the bounds of your life? Last Saturday, Joe wrote, when thinking about, figure out what your next step is. He wrote, like, be the best version of whatever you're great at, and build your network based on mutual trust and benefit. And I think that's right, but I think it might actually even start deeper than that. I think it might start with, like, how do you actually be the best version of yourself? Um, and so, in what you do in your life, how can you be the best version of yourself? And if you can be the best version of yourself, how does that allow you to express the best version of what you can do? And that's going to be different for every person. And ultimately, we all have only one life to live. And so, if you're not aspiring to be the best version of yourself and to pour out into the world the best that you can create, then, like, kind of, what are we doing, right? Like, how does all that fit together? And that's very, very, very personal. And I think all of that starts, you need to do all of that before you can ask yourself other questions. But these next questions, I think, are then really important. And these are the next questions I asked myself, which was, okay, now I know what the best version of myself is. I know what I feel like I'm really good at, but who do I want to serve, right? And again, that's a high level question about, like, kind of the customer, or the person you want to deliver value to in your business, the business you create, the business you want to go ahead and work in. But before you figure out who you want to serve, you got to figure out, who are you? Like, who's the best version of yourself? And when I was talking to Joe about this on Friday, and I was expressing this to him, he was like, these are really hard questions to ask yourself. This is probably one of the reasons probably a lot of people don't do this. And I agree with that, but I think it's critical, right? Like, how do you become the best version of yourself? What's the best version of what is the best thing that you can create? What are you the best at? And then how does that translate into, who do you want to serve? And I think figuring out who you want to serve is critical, right? Because if you're then pouring into the world the best version of yourself and what you can create, well, like, whatever you do, you are going to have to serve that group of people for some period of time, 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, whatever it is. And if you're not passionate about that, if you don't believe in that, if that's not connected to who you are and what you do, then, like, you're probably not going to be able to do it authentically. You're not going to be able to do it genuinely. And ultimately, you're not going to be happy. You're not going to be serving yourself as well. And so I think that's actually a really, really critical question, and probably a more important question to ask yourself first, before you ask yourself the final question, which I think is, what is the product that I want to create? What is the thing that I actually tactically want to go ahead and do? Like, what's the business idea that I have? What's the ideal business or product that I want to go help others build? that has to be connected to all of these other things and hard questions that you ask yourself first. And I didn't do all of this again really with this like grand plan in mind. Like it maybe sounds a little bit that way now, but this took me just a lot of time of just being present and thinking through and writing about where I had been and where I was going. And I think to do that well, everyone needs to afford themselves some amount of time to go do that. And again, that's going to be different for everyone. And for me, what I found was, the best version of myself, I believe, is some form of entrepreneur, some form of founder. And I aspire to be a high growth CEO again in the future. But I had to admit to myself that I had these other competing interests, right? And I have a young family. We've gone through a lot over the last 5 years. Is starting today a venture backed, high growth finance startup in this moment of my life, in this 3 months of my life, in this year of my life, is that the best version of myself? And the answer was probably not. Even if it is going to be again in the future, today it's not. But being an entrepreneur and an aspiring CEO is. So what do I do with that, right? I think so that was my first realization. I think the second real big realization for me was that I wanted to serve other people like myself. So I met Joe through being a founder and an entrepreneur in the data space. And in some ways, I love serving data professionals, but that's not where I currently am. And honestly, like if I'm just being honest with all of you, I'm not even sure I'm good at that. Right. Do I truly understand them as deeply as I need? I don't know. Right. But serving other aspiring founders and CEOs and in some way felt really, really right to me. And so that was kind of the answer to my second question. And then the third question, it felt right to write. It felt right to pour forward my lessons, to do stuff like this, to kind of create content, to help other CEOs and founders bend the curve of their learning and growth, which is our new mission at Not Another CEO. And we're starting with content on a Substack. But there's a lot of products. There's a lot of services that we could go ahead and create in service to that mission. And we're learning, right? And all of this is actually, I think, the opposite way I went versus the opposite way I went when I created Workstream and I had the idea for Workstream, when I had the idea for this product first. But it feels much, much more right to me. So that is very different. And the last thing I'll say that feels very different is that I am comfortable being uncomfortable with not knowing where all of it goes, right? That I feel like I'm being the best version of myself. I feel like I'm pouring out from me the best version of myself in service of others, in service of founders and CEOs, aspiring founders and CEOs. But I don't know exactly where it's going. And that feels very different. And so again, to conclude, I don't know if this is blanket advice for everyone. I share this because Joe made me think about it over the weekend, and I wanted to share it with everybody. But I think that some version of this is right for a lot of people. And so I would encourage you to think about, in whatever time you have, if you are transitioning, is to think about, who am I? What's the best version of myself? How do I become the best version of myself? And through that, what's the best version of what I can do? And then ask yourself, who do I want to serve? And only then do you know what is the product or service tactically that you want to create. So, hey, that's my meditation here on Monday, March 24th. And yeah, hope you found it valuable. And let me know if you have any feedback. Thank you.